Welcome to the first episode of the DEA Techie Tuesday. Are you interested in technology? Do you want to learn about code? Are you looking for a place to nurture your inner nerd? This is for you because we think tech is fun. At the Digital Euro Association, we talk a lot about CBDCs, monetary economics, and monetary politics. And what I personally often find is that when I personally found a topic very interesting, and I would laughed to have asked a deep dive question, I knew that I would lose huge parts of the audience. So we decided to experiment with a brand new event format, the Techie Tuesday, because tech is fun. We will publish 3 episodes in the next 3 months, and you are in control. If you like this format, please signal this by liking and sharing it. Please, even better, in the next 2 episodes, ask a question, because the next episodes will be live, and this episode is pre-recorded. I am pleased and honored to have 2 guests of Ripple, our gold partner at the Digital Euro Association. Ripple is a crypto solutions company that transforms how the world moves, manages, and tokenizes value. Antony Welfare, Senior Advisor in Global Partnerships, CBDC at Ripple, and Antony Ralphs, Lead Product Manager, CBDC at Ripple, are here with me, and I want to send a warm welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Valentin. Great to be here.
Thank you.
We structured our first Techie Tuesday episode. Antony Welfare will give a brief high-level overview, and then we will jump into the technical solution with Antony Ralphs. Antony Welfare, please.
Thanks, Valentin. So I will just share you an overview of our thought process for the CBDC model. So I'm Antony Welfare. I'm the Senior Advisor for CBDCs at Ripple. And looking after partnerships, I'm really growing out the CBDC system. So we've been working on this for about 2 years now. So there's a team of, I think it's about 35 people globally. So we're really taking CBDC seriously. We work with lots of different banks. The most important part, though, is to start with stable and resilient and secure base. If you think about a CBDC, it's the country's money. It's the sovereign nation money. It's the most important money, digital currency, whatever we call it, that we have in our countries. So the foundation of everything that we do at Ripple, but importantly with CBDCs, is standards, consistency, and robust technology. One of the things around standards as well is very important. Standards are helping to develop a set of standards for the way that we operate CBDCs, where we operate CBDCs and how. That actually comes from our history of 10 years of doing cross-border payments, where we've helped to get the standards of cross-border payments to a certain level. Therefore, other companies and other providers can actually do this. So foundation number 1 is stability. The second one, surprise, surprise, is security and trust. We have to have security. This is our currency for our nation. But part of security and trust is clear regulations and transparency. Regulations are still work in progress. All CBDCs are still very, very sort of, let's say mid-stage. I think they're past early stage, but mid-stage in terms of how to regulate and work with them. And transparency and privacy is a big discussion which happens around this. The third level then is, once you've got the foundations, this is then to start get the interesting part and really start to see the benefits of CBDCs. Access and inclusion, not just for people, for citizens, but the banks, the fintechs, the different liquidity providers, lots of different people, companies and institutions want to operate with this. So we look at this layer, which in essence, is coming around an API type layer and bringing in other parties and other solutions. Number 4 is interoperability. We actually think about this from day one. It's not something we think about later on. And this is all about how do we connect with the domestic system, the current system in the countries, but other systems, CBDCs, stablecoins, native cryptos, they will all be part of the future, and they all need to work together. And in somehow we need to make that happen. So we think about that a lot. And then finally, for me, as the businessman, the most exciting bit is all around what we can do with this. So once we've built it, once it works and it's interoperable and it's secure and it's resilient, how can we use this to pay our people better, to earn money, to send money across borders, to earn micropayments, to do all the innovation that CBDCs allow? So that section for me is the most exciting, but you need the foundations first. So I'll leave this now and hand over to Antony Rouse, who will talk you through the technology.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. And just a bit of background of who I am. I'm delighted to be here today. I've been with Ripple for over 5 years. I helped build out and start the RippleNet cross-border payments network. I spent a lot of time during that time building out the rules base and the technology standards for interoperability around leveraging the likes of ISO 20022 as a messaging format, and actively participate in the standards body today. Prior to that, I've spent quite a lot of time in my career working with payments and messaging systems, all associated with payments and financial services. And this is kind of, for me, the next evolution of that technology stack, and why I'm so excited to be part of what we're doing here at Ripple on this. And part of today, I'm going to take you through a little bit around how we're approaching some of the abilities to interact, issue a CBDC, but also to distribute it. And just to show you just sort of really high-level examples of some of the controls, the thinking that we've been doing in this space, and just to give you a flavor of this. This could go on for hours, so in terms of the amount of detail we can go into, but we want to keep it sort of super interesting and informative, and hopefully drives a lot of interesting questions and debate. Okay, so I'm just going to switch out and jump into my my manager. So we have this tool called the CBDC Manager. It allows us to provide access to interacting with the underlying ledger, and that's the important piece here, that there's an underlying ledger that is manipulating, settling transactions, and passing value between all the participants in the ledger. This is a technology that we're using based on the XRP ledger technology, which has been in use for over 10 years now, and is actively used in the public sphere today. We've taken that technology and made it available to central banks to use it in a private context. So you get all the benefits of the XRP ledger, but you get it in a private context. And that's super important when we start to think about the needs of central banks and governments when we are thinking about currency and domestic money supply. So what I'm going to do first of all is log in as an administrator. I just want to show you a little bit of some of the setup and the underlying access controls that we've got here within the platform. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as what we call an administrator of the application. Here you can see, for the purposes of a demonstration, I've created a number of accounts. We have one primary account, which is our issuing account, which is used to publish a currency onto the ledger. That is the source of ultimate truth and is really sort of critical to the issuance of the currency. And so with the different security models that we need to consider and apply to this, and I'll explain a little bit that as we go. But for the purposes of this session today, I've got 3 accounts that I've created. I've got my issuing account, and what I've done to simulate a currency, I've created my own currency called Ant. And I can see I've got 3 different accounts here. I have my issuing account, which is the primary account for issuing my currency. I've also got an operational account and a standby account. If you think of this as just moving money internally within the realms of the central bank in terms of distributing and moving currency from all the way from the money printer all the way through to, if you think about it at the perimeter, the ATMs or the clocks, drawers in a bank branch for distributing cash to the end user or the end customer. And it's about providing control and reducing risk, because what we don't want to do is we want to limit access to the money printer, but what we want to do is provide controls and different levels of authority when you get nearer to the perimeter of the bank in terms of issuing currency. And to that extent, if I just look at one of these accounts, we can apply what we call account signers. So from a pure crypto perspective, there's this concept of private and public keys and signing. What we use is something called multi-sig or multi-signature capabilities, which is part of the underlying ledger technology that we inherit when we use the XRP ledger for CBDC issuance. We get these account signers. We can specify business rules based on risk profiles and policies. So in this example, what I've done is I've created two, what I'm calling chief cashiers. These users are responsible for managing the money from the issuing account. I could have as many signers, designated signers, as I would like within the application to support this. And each user has a weighting or an approval authority that they bring when they approve or sign a transaction. So for this example, I've given each of my users a weighting of 1, and I have to get to a score or a minimum weighting of 2 to be able to authorize and fully sign a transaction. So each user is applying their credentials, signing the transaction or will be signing the transaction, and we can determine how many participants are involved, but also the authority that each of those users brings. I could add different flavors here, so I could introduce a more senior user, perhaps within the central bank, like a deputy governor, who might have a weighting of 2. That it means that only they need to sign the transaction for that account. So this is important when we come back to thinking about our accounts, thinking about the different signing authorities that are required in order to distribute money. And we can provide different levels of security right around the issuing account and have different requirements at the perimeter accounts. So it allows us to track and see and control the funds movement. Just quickly on this screen as well, you can also see, I can see just the balances that are associated against each of these accounts currently. And again, they will all reconcile back to the issuing account balance. If I also just click on this public address here, this will actually take me to the underlying ledger. So I can see all the configuration associated with this account. So if we want to get in sort of into the detailed technical configuration, this is essentially a representation of that account on the ledger. Now, the Ripple CBDC platform works on an account basis predominantly. And what you can see here is all the transactional activity against the account. I can see balances, I can see the signers. So the 2 users that we've set up for this account, they have these keys that are used to designate them as signers on the account. I can click the balance, so I can ultimately see the balance of this account, and then any historical transactional activity against that account. So you start to see a pattern that's more akin to traditional banking systems, but still brings sort of the crypto concepts to it in terms of how it settles, how you sign transactions, and how you distribute funds. I'm just going to have my ledger running in the background. So what I've got here is a ledger. There's no transactional activity because it's just me on the system at this point in time. But as you can see, the ledger is looking for new entries. And what we're going to do is we're going to populate an entry onto here very shortly. So I'm going to come out of here now. I'm going to log in as a user that actually wants to be performing issuance of a currency. So this is me logging in as an administrator before. Now I'm logging as one of my chief cashiers who's going to have authority to mint or issue currency. So if I just come into here and pick my first user, and I've set my demonstration up here that every transaction requires 2 signers. This is just a sort of a basic example of the various different mechanisms for or authority profiles that you can specify. So you can see now a slightly different view of the world. This is more of like a day-to-day operational view rather than a system setup view. I can see all the transactions or the mint requests that we've been issued so far. Across the top here, I can also see payment instructions. So if I'm moving money to third parties, we can also destroy currency. So we can remove it from circulation by redeeming it or allowing it to be removed from circulation. So that's another key business process, an operational process that the system can cater for. And what you can also see here across the top is a sort of a high-level balance to reconcile the amount of currency that's in circulation. I can see what's totally been completely minted by the issuing account. So that's the entirety of the CBDC that we produced, this Ant coin in this example. I then have an amount in my standby accounts. So this is looking at all the accounts that I've got that are designated as standby accounts. So if you think of these as the sort of the vault after the physical money has been printed, you put it into a secure vault before you distribute it to other outlets. So that's what I've got stored in my standby account, my local vault. I've also got this distributable balance. So these are my perimeter accounts, my ATMs, my teller draws, waiting for distribution. And then finally, what I can also see here is I've got 125 ant in circulation. And as we go through the demonstration, we're going to increase the amount of ant in circulation because I'm going to send it to an external wallet or external account. So this allows me really, really simply to snapshot to see how much is actually outside of my account structure and is actually being held by third parties. Again, super important when we want to reconcile how much currency is in circulation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new issuance or a new minting request. I can see I've got just over 160,000 ant tokens minted. I'm going to create another 5,000 here. So just really simply 5,000 tokens, and I'm going to send it to my standby account. I'm going to create the request. So it's really that process of creating the request is really simple. What's happening now, though, is it's gone into a pending state. So what that means is it needs further action. It needs to go through a signing process in order to complete the issuance of that currency. So I can see here I've got my 2 users that are set up against my account for signing. I'm going to just sign this transaction because that's me as my first user. I'm going to approve that. Now, what's happening here, importantly, is actually using my credentials, my private key, to sign the transaction. And what we've set up here is this private key set up securely in the background. But that could be other mechanisms for storing those keys depending on the needs of the central bank. So this allows secure storage of the key, but I can't just sign any transaction, and I can't just, in the way I've got my system set up, be the only signer. I have to get somebody else to sign it. So again, providing controls, checks and balances around the issuance process. So I'm just going to quickly log in now as my other user, my other chief cashier, so I can complete this process. So I just pick my other user. And each user has to have their own user account. So this is not something that you share user accounts. This follows very similar patterns to traditional banking workstations and platforms, that you want to be able to audit and control who can do what and when, and see a full history around that. The beauty is of using things like the CBDC ledger underneath is all transaction activity against the account is fully audited from day one. You don't have to supplement this. This is more about audit activity within the application, this tool itself, so that auditors can easily see this information. So I'm just going to provide my final approval. I'm okay with this transaction to increase the circulation or minted ant coins. So I've sent that for signing it. So again, it's using the secure storage to pull my private key out. And what we now have is the transaction's ready. Now, this means it hasn't been submitted to the ledger just yet. It's ready to be submitted. So the next stage is for me to submit that transaction. And what I'm just going to quickly do is come back to my ledger. And we should see very shortly, he says, there we go. So this is my transaction that I've just created that's been published onto the ledger. So this is operating in real time. This is an active transaction that we've got. If I click into this transaction, I can see all the detail behind it. So I can see that we've got a transaction that's affecting the ledger with 5,000 new ant coin. I can see all of the details. So if we get into super low level detail of wanting to understand the entire data set behind the underlying ledger transaction, we can do. But it's really just important to show that this is actually a real living, breathing system. This is not something that we're just sort of simulating here. If I come back to my manager, I can now see that that's been completed. So we've got an audit trail there. And if you recall, just before at the start of the demonstration, we had just over 160,000 ant coin minted. We've now got 165,000, and the balance of my standby account has also increased. So that's the first aspect of just issuing a coin, putting it into a situation where it could be circulated. And then what we're going to do now is I'm just going to quickly show you how to distribute that to an end user wallet. And that, again, that's somebody completely decoupled from this system. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly just resize my screen a little bit. I've got my phone operating here. So I've got a wallet ready to go. Need to just reset share my screen, I think. There we go. Okay, so on the right hand side, I can see I've now got a wallet that's appearing, and I've got some Ant coin already in there. I've got 125. What I'm now going to do is actually distribute and send some more Ant coin to that external wallet. So I'm just going to log out this time and log in as what we call a distribution officer. This is just a name that we've given for the purposes of demonstrating this principle. Okay, so again, I get the same view. This time you'll see this user. I only have the ability to pay or destroy. This user has no ability to mint token. It's all about the actual operational issuance of the coin now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my balance by 75 here on my wallet. So let me just make sure I've got that open. Okay, so I'm going to add 75 Ant to this wallet to take it to 200. I'm going to send it from my operational account, and I've set up an account here that has an automatic linking. So typically when you're setting up these distributable accounts to distribute to, there will be some sort of onboarding process that you go through to set them up to receive transactions. So this is where things like existing KYC processes can be applied to, as you onboard accounts or wallets, you can onboard them and set them up and go through a KYC process. And in this example, I can't pay any wallet or send funds to any other account. I have to go through an onboarded account. So I'm just going to use that principle here and create this account. I'll make sure I keep that open. So again, very, very similar situation to before. I can see that I've got a transaction that's in pending state, waiting for somebody to action it. I'm just going to approve that because I have authority for this account. And again, not wanting to repeat myself too much here, I'm just going to log in as the other user. And I've got a second distribution officer that I'm logging in as. So what we should see very shortly is once I approve this, so this is that distribution of that currency, and submit that, I should see two things. If I come back to my ledger, come back to my Explorer, I should see very shortly on the right hand side that my balance increases. I can see there's the transaction here. So I can click into here and I can see the underlying transaction. And I can now see that my balance in my wallet has gone up to 200. And what I can do is I can click into here and I can see the information that's received. So I can see I can see that my balance is increased. I could then use that to pay for goods and services in a store, or for distributing to somebody else to provide a peer-to-peer payment, or other opportunities that the CBDC platform provides. But as you can see, this is also a living, breathing platform that this is running on. And the wallet providers, this is where we see an ecosystem coming where third parties can build new wallets, new apps. Existing providers and participants in traditional financial ecosystems can extend their applications to talk to the CBDC ledger and represent these accounts within the platform, so that participants can leverage the underlying CBDC platform. And that really today concludes the portion of the demonstration, just to show really simply the issuance process, how easy that is, and how we can control the access and security around that model, but also to be able to distribute CBDC to an end user wallet that could then use it for third-party payments or purchases of goods and services.
Thank you so much, Antony Rives. May I ask a direct follow-up question towards your very great presentation? Yes, thanks again. I should say that I really enjoyed it, and I feel honored to maybe be one of the first persons, at least at the Digital Euro Association, that sees your product and can have this insight into how you envision a CBDC could be issued.
Yeah,
which is great. So you use different names, obviously. You use an officer, you use an admin, and an issuer. It was a little bit complicated to follow track. So I would like to know, imagine we have a continent with different states, yeah? And we all have like one currency, the Ant, obviously, the Ant. It's a Ant union, I guess, that we talk about. And So who would be the admin and who would be the central bank of and union?
Yeah, good, great question. So I kind of tried to show different personas interacting with the currency here. So most underlying payment systems and payment infrastructure is typically run by some sort of operator that's designated by the central authority.
Yeah.
So if I think about it in that simplistic term, that the administrator is somebody that's providing that technical platform that is doing basic administration of onboarding end users for the central bank or the issuer.
Yeah.
So they're the kind of systems administrators that when you want a new application, you want a new login, they're the people you go to and they set it up.
Yeah.
The other two user profiles or personas that I looked at was a chief cashier and a distribution officer. These are just names that Ripple have given these activities really just to demonstrate during the issuance process, discrete roles. So a chief cashier in this example has the authority to do issuance, to create new coins. This would be typically somebody that we would expect to be operating at the monetary authority or the central bank, just as they would do today to sign off the physical printing of money. And so what we do is we've been working with a number of central banks and monetary authorities to map into our system their processes of how do they do things today, how does this look like in a CBDC world. So the issuer is really sort of the really senior figures that sign off and authorize the physical production. The distribution officers, as you saw from the demonstration, have a slightly different user interface. They can't create, all they can do is distribute. So it allows segregation and separation of concerns and responsibilities. And really it comes down to the authorities of how do you sign and how many people are needed to get involved in the distribution issuance of the currency. But we would see that as really as monetary authority or central bank users who have those designated responsibilities in their current roles today.
Okay, great. So it's like a Tuesday, so let's oversimplify the economic side. Chief cashier, this was the central bank. The distribution officer was the commercial bank, private bank. And let's oversimplify again. The request to issue or mint a new N token, 5,000 N token, was the process of, let's say, credit creation, right? More or less?
Absolutely, yes. It's a trigger and activity that allows the central bank to perform that function. That's
great. And so we have this, three levels of our current system, also central bank money. I mean, obviously both as a CBDC, but the third level was the retail side, and you said their wallet providers can come in, third-party wallet providers that can connect to your ledger, I guess?
Correct.
There will be one ledger, or will there be one ledger per CBDC?
So it really depends on the design of the system and the requirements. And we've seen everything from we want one ledger to rule them all and to have every participant interacting with it, to we actually want to segregate certain transaction types. So maybe wholesale from retail are separate ledgers or separate chains. That all comes down to things like privacy, security, who's accessing it. They're all different, so there's not one size fits all. It really depends on the use case and the methodology that the central bank or the monetary authority is looking to perform. But you're absolutely correct. The way we've kind of demonstrated that was really to show there's different levels of potentially wholesale issuance and then retail CBDC that could be distributed then to the end consumer or the end user. And the way we think about the CBDC solution and the platform that we've been building is really an ecosystem. We don't see Ripple providing all the technology to support this. Actually, the technology that we're underpinning is an open source technology set. We've got third-party developers already building on the XRP ledger. So we take the same ethos here that we're actually, when we're working with central banks and monetary authorities, is looking at how do we help local communities, local economies, and innovation teams really bring their expertise, local knowledge to build that out. And that's some of the aspirations sometimes of some of these projects. It's actually building a new high-tech economy, building on top of this. And that's part of what Ripple will help central banks go through, is enabling that education, that foundation to go and build things that we, quite frankly, I think we've not even thought of yet. It's a bit like the 1990s, the internet. Nobody could have dreamt of what we've got now at that point in time. And I think there's a similar sort of sort of change in sort of thinking here with CBDCs.
That's great. Yeah, yeah. We don't know what innovation this will allow. I like this this model of like different technologies. Let's imagine we have this continent, and there's another continent, the Val continent. I don't know, that uses a totally different CBDC system with a, let's say, centralized ledger. Yeah, right. So what about interoperability between those two systems?
That's a really good question, and I think it's one of those that we've seen some experiments on. Ripple has a lot of experience in working on cross-border payments from start. That was kind of my background when I joined Ripple, was looking at building out RippleNet.
Right.
I think one of the sort of patterns that you start to see is, how do you bridge between two different ledgers? That could be something as simple as a bridge function that operates, that essentially reconciles the accounts on both sides. It could be essentially replicating the traditional nostro-vostro relationship and having an intermediary that actually provides that bridge. That's some of the work that Ripple did way back when, working with like the Bank of England, looking at, could two central banks bridge through an intermediary. So there's different ways there, but also more importantly is the amount of information that needs to be passed to support delivering the payment correctly to the end destination, and ensuring things like compliance and KYC rules can be adhered to. Now, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. The G20's been doing some really good work on trying to harmonize some of these standards, and I think that's kind of where Ripple provides that opportunity, that we can support different levels of integration, interoperability, and even to the point where the XRP ledger is being introduced with sidechain functionality, which also could be used as a way of providing interoperability between two different discrete ledgers. So again, there's no one size fits all, but a lot of it comes down to actually ensuring, for me, the settlement finality between the two ledgers. That's the fundamental piece here, because that's creating, so that it de-risks the entire process. And that, I think, is a journey that people are still starting out on, because everybody's been looking at predominantly this in isolation. We're now starting to see interoperability coming up the agenda, and that's something that Ripple are actively engaged in.
Yeah, right. And it sounds a little bit like we need trusted third parties and maybe technical standards, right? Messaging standards.
I think there's also another important point, and again, absolutely spot on in terms of your view of this, is that the underlying technology of things like the XRP ledger comes with a decentralized exchange that again could be used as a bridge or a mechanism of trading between two different currencies. So there's a whole host of different models here that could be deployed, depending really on the appetite, the risk model. And it may be that some of these are done in initial pilot phases before they get rolled out at scale. So I think we're so early on in this phase that we could just replicate very easily the existing models. But I think there's an opportunity here to deploy new thinking here on optimization, and potentially our new participants to provide that bridging function under a regulated guise.
Right. You mentioned the XRP, like the Ripple ledger now, I think 3 or 4 times, maybe 5. So I really want to ask, like, what classifies it? What's the standard about it? What's the difference to DLT, like proof of work like Bitcoin, and proof of stake like Ethereum 2 that maybe comes after the merge?
Again, thank you. Another great question. I think if I look back to the inception of the XRP ledger, that Ripple have been privy to and been party to along the evolution of that ledger. It was designed really from the ground up to be a payments ledger. It wasn't designed to be a generic ledger. It was designed purely for payments and being good at payments. And that's one of the reasons why Ripple has done so much work in this space, because that's where we think there's an opportunity here. And that's why we're using it as a raw underpinning of the CBDC platform. It's got good throughput, to the sort of throughput that you need to be able to process transactions at scale. It's low cost.
Can you say a number? I think I saw a block time of 1 block per second around about. What?
The previously posted, it varies depending on the usage model, but we've seen everything from sort of 1500 TPS up to many thousand, depending on the use case and deployment models. Again, it's about thinking about the problem you're trying to solve for, and how do you scale it with different models.
Okay, right.
But the raw XRP ledger itself, it is ticking along very nicely at well over 1500 transactions a second, and can cater for that very easily, and has been stable. but I think, say, just coming back to it's performant, it has low energy consumption. So I think we're one of the only carbon neutral
great
ledgers, which is becoming ever important in the current world, especially with the cost of electricity and gas, but also from the environmental effects. So that's something that, again, that Ripple feels very strongly about in terms of making sure that we're choosing the right technology and using the right technology for the greater good, because ultimately this is trying to create a platform that's efficient to use. But it's also very low cost. It doesn't, you can specify fractions of a penny or no cost at all in a private decentralized ledger. So that's important as well when we compare it to other ledgers where you've got proof of work, proof of stake, potentially have cost associated with just participating on the ledger. That can be such a nominal effect that it's actually negligible in terms of the running from a CBDC perspective. And again, that gives us control and capability. And I think just also the other, from a technology perspective, is the ledger itself has a lot of underlying native functionality built into it. So we're not having to write smart contracts or program code to enable features like escrow capability to be, and that's why we're able to leverage things like issuing currencies very, very easily. We don't have to write a smart contract to issue a token or issue a coin. It's natively built into the ledger. And we're supplementing that, the community is supplementing that through enhancements that we're bringing, like what we call hooks, what's called hooks by the community, which allows programmability of your CBDC and the XRP token as part of the underlying technology. So we get a lot of benefits of programmability, but in perhaps a safer, more controlled manner. And I think that's also important when we talk to central banks and regulators and monetary authorities. It's risk. And do you want to risk creating a smart contract that potentially might have some vulnerabilities in it? And again, I look back at the XRP ledger. It's got a 10-year history of running with, and I will touch wood here, with no real publicized issues or loss of transactions. And that's really, really important when you compare it to today's world. And you look at other networks that always claim things like never losing transactions or messages. You have to have that robustness. And this comes back to Antony's point right at the top of the session about this layer of trust and stability is super, super important when we're talking about money and what's in people's pockets, because that's ultimately where we need to protect. It's the poor people that are most vulnerable that ultimately need to have trust in the system and confidence that their money is not going to be tampered with or lost.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for mentioning these two important points. Like, first of all, the XRP ledger, which is very cost efficient, carbon neutral, and more than thousands times faster and more efficient than the, for example, Ethereum network. Financial inclusion is obviously a very economic topic, so we won't go deep here, but I really like your approach of, like, did I get it right? You offer standard products instead of programmability. So like the escrow contract, or like a token, or I don't know, a startup finance product. I don't know what you offer. This puzzle pieces to provide the stability and security, right?
So yeah, I think it's important that this is not something that Ripple's provided. This is the XRP ledger itself provides natively. So there's a number of critical functions in the ledger, underlying ledger, that you get for free essentially by using it as a CBDC ledger. So you get, say, there's escrow capabilities baked into. So it's a bit like an off-the-shelf product. You've kind of got this stuff from day one. You don't have to think about writing this. But what we are working with the community, and the community is doing a great job of bringing in enhancements to the ledger. So programmability is one of the things that perhaps we've kind of not focused on heavily from a community to this point, but we're focusing now because we see the opportunity now. We've got a stable platform that is robust. So we talk about issuing of tokens. We don't have to do things like write ERC20 tokens or contracts to be able to issue a currency. There's something called issued tokens or issued currencies features natively on the ledger, and that's what we're leveraging here as a way of issuing a currency. And by that, it looks and feels and behaves very much like a native currency. It doesn't. It has all the capabilities and the benefits of leveraging this underlying XRP ledger-based technology without the need to write a line of program code.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So I think we should slowly come to an end, but as I said, slowly. I've got 3 more questions. I think I would start with, let's start high level. Let's start at the central bank again. I saw chief cashier, which was the central bank, distribution officer, which was the private bank or commercial bank. Both had a login into your into the front end, where I assume there's a backend server in the background. And each individual officer had a key to sign a transaction for like a multi-sig wallet, I imagined. And I'm wondering about the private keys. Like, is there a custodial solution behind that centrally manages the private keys to sign the transaction to go into the XRP ledger? Or how does this work?
Well, fantastic question. So for the purpose of the demonstration, we've created a key store that sits behind the scenes for all my users, just to sort of simplify things. We've done some work with physical devices, so that users are prompted, they manage their private key on a physical device. So again, it follows a similar pattern to a lot of banking platforms where they're perhaps using RSA tokens or multi-factor authentication to verify. But we can use physical devices. So that's one aspect. We are also working and talking to a number of custody providers who specialize in this for financial institutions, and they can also do key management capabilities. So I talked about this partner ecosystem. What I've shown you here really is the sort of the bootstrap way of getting the CBDC platform off the ground. Like the retail wallet, we also see third-party custody services plugging into this to provide key management capabilities and control capabilities for a CBDC for a retail institution like a commercial bank. So I just sort of demonstrated the art of just doing it very simply through one interface, but actually we can decouple those so that the central bank uses the tool that we've just shown, and the commercial banks have their own platform, their own tool that allows them to manage their CBDC and distribute it.
Great, perfect. Thank you so much, Anthony Ross, because you actually answered my second question. Because I was wondering, like, so we obviously we have the XRP ledger as the base layer, and you showed us this front end and the wallet. The wallet can be substituted by a third-party provider, like each wallet on your mobile, on your computer, and as a browser extension. And the front end can also be substituted. So I guess which part of the system cannot be substituted? The XRP ledger, the front end for the private banks, I assume, can be substituted, and the front end for the central banks, I guess this would be the WIBIS solution.
Yes. So I think the two pieces that Ripple really bring. This is the manager that we've taken through for central banks and issuers to be able to use. We've built that for that purpose and to help demonstrate and to help get our customers sort of working. The underlying ledger, I mentioned it's open source, but it's essentially part of the solution that Ripple provide. We've chosen the XRP ledger for this as the basis for the CBDC ledger because of the hallmarks that it has. And that would be deployed by a number of parties. That could be deployed entirely by the central bank, or it could be deployed by a technical operator of the payment system, or what we're also seeing is commercial banks running nodes of that network. So it kind of creates an even distributed component to that. So again, different deployment models. So there's the underlying node which supports the ledger interactivity. And then you're absolutely right, the commercial bank user interface. So if you take it to the traditional world of the sort of payment gateways, this is where a commercial bank could insert or use their technology of choice, providing it supports the underlying XRP ledger-based technology, and use that to interact with the CBDC ledger, and likewise with retail wallets. So Ripple bring a number of components to sort of get the network going, but the rest of it then becomes an ecosystem of how do central banks want to sort of promote and support different actors and participants in building technology for it.
And that's absolutely fantastic. Last question would be about the retail side. I mean, we all know the discussion about like unhosted wallets. KYC is important, but on the other hand, privacy is one, at least from our perspective, the most important factor for a CBDC, because like nobody wants to implement a surveillance state here. So where is the KYC level, and how can privacy be ensured?
So if I think about it from a traditional sense of you want to participate in an ecosystem, somebody typically will do that onboarding for you or give you that entrance or access to it. That could be a wallet provider. And what the way the system works is the level of KYC or the level of information required to participate can vary depending on the risk profile, the very sort of personas of participants in that ecosystem. So I think back to, if I'm a tourist into a country, do I want to be providing my birth certificate, driving license, passport, just to be able to spend some money while I'm on holiday? No, so there are different solutions designed to be catered. So this is where we work with third-party providers like wallet providers, who can also provide and establish different user experiences for the different participants. And because it's all using the same underlying ledger, a tourist can interact with a retailer or a merchant very easily, because the merchant might have one set of KYC capabilities and onboarding requirements, and the tourist has a different set. So the underlying ledger is that underpinning. But you're absolutely right. In terms of privacy, what we're seeing is different model where potentially there is a separate layer or a component that allows private transactions to be between counterparties. There's always going to be some identifier that you can link back to somebody. And what we're working with central banks is a way of mitigating the exposure to individuals to be able to reconcile that to other forms of identity. And as you saw in the transaction that I published that showed on the ledger, there's very little information other than the actual IDs of the accounts involved. And what we're seeing is, say, a multi-layered approach to providing security. First is who can access the underlying ledger. So this is where we see a world where, talking from our conversation with central banks, is they'll be onboarding participants just as you would do into a domestic payment system, and providing a framework that you must meet a certain level of requirement in terms of security, privacy, processes. They're the sort of participants that can interact with the ledger directly. Then the next level comes down to how do they sort of onboard their customers, and how much information is actually needed to be shared between the parties. So again, conscious that it's quite a broad question, but we're approaching this from a number of different angles depending on the use cases, because sometimes you need more information to be shared initially to onboard, but actually the ultimate transactional detail will really depend on the use case of the central bank and whether all parties are happy to share the information depending on the remit.
Yeah.
You know, so there's lots of really cool ideas around the community that actually can help with this privacy and give the governments what they need, and the central banks and their security, and give the people the balance of the privacy.
I totally agree, and there's so much else in the internet, like big data, obviously the Web 2, central servers, your browser identity. There's so much that's actually a threat to privacy that sometimes we forget that. Yeah, obviously, like money is not the only thing where your privacy is matters. Yeah, thanks for the last words. This were all my questions. I more than enjoyed it. I found it more interesting than I actually expected. I really enjoyed your solutions. Thank you so much, Antony Wiles, for the introduction and for answering all my deep tech questions. And thanks, Antony Welfare, for giving your last remarks. And I want to invite you to give the last words. Maybe Antony Wiles, do you have a last comment?
I think what you're seeing here is, say, we approach this as a platform. This is an ecosystem. This is not just a piece of single software that gets deployed. There's policy required, there's consideration, there's economic impacts to this. So this is not just a sort of, I get a piece of software and install it. These are quite engaged projects, and that's kind of the world that Ripple have been living in for certainly my time at Ripple, in terms of fairly sort of substantial change projects. And that's kind of how we approach this. And we're working with partners, but it's really exciting. And I think we've barely scratched the surface on this. I think there's a lot of questions that we need to answer as a collective from a technology perspective, but as a community. And I think these things will become clearer the more education, the more engagement, and the more projects that are actually done where people are using them in a real life situation, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. That's where you work out how can you use money and how can you use this as a direct placement. And I kind of, for this to be a success, you've got to make this as easy as physical cash. in terms of its usability. I always kind of use my grandparents as, could I give them crypto today and allow them to use it to go and pay for their groceries? Very difficult. So we need to sort of make sure that there's low friction in this for it to drive adoption, because you can have the best technology in the world. If it's not usable, it won't get adopted. And so I think that's also the balancing act here of, we've got this very, very capable technology and a real opportunity. It's to make sure that we do it in a responsible and right way, that actually people see the benefits for it and actually want to use it.
I absolutely agree. And you said you'll be open to questions. Maybe this is a time to introduce the outlook to a third episode with you, Ripple, in maybe half a year, to answer more questions, to have a live recording and to talk more about the retail side. Antony, welfare. Do you have any last comments, important things? I really enjoyed it.
No, I thank you for inviting us. It's been a pleasure to show the work so far, and this is only the start as well. Antony's got a lot of work to do, but I think there's two things I'd say for people listening is to get involved in this. So from a technical, from a tech side, so if you're a techie watching this, what can you do? Antony talked lots about the XRP ledger and things that are happening on the XRP ledger. So wallets are important, KYC is important, but there's lots of things that can be built on a native crypto ledger like XRP ledger that we're going to use in our lives for this. So I'd say get involved, start building things on XRP ledger. That comes through to us as the CBDC team. So that's if you're a techie. And if you're a business person or just a normal human watching this, get involved in these discussions, because too many people and too many of my friends say, oh, CBDCs are going to do this, this, and this. And I'd say 99% of them are factually incorrect. Join places like you guys, like the DEA. Let's have these open discussions about privacy, have the open discussions about where it should work, and then we can innovate, and then we can do amazing things with this. So really, my message is get involved in this. Don't let it happen to us. Let's really, be part of it together. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I absolutely love this last word. Get involved. Join the DEA. It's free as a person. Join the discussion. Answer questions. Join the Techie Tuesday if you are techie. If you like tech, tech is fun. Please, this is very serious. My personal note. Please like this YouTube video and share this so we know that you are interested in tech. Thank you very much, Antony Rives. Thank you very much, Antony Welfare, and thank you very much, Techie. See you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.